Over the years, we've taken a look at how some films introduce and attempt to normalize new ideas, themes, and ideologies to the empty vessels that are in the audience. Audiences who are so wrapped up in the emotion or the trauma of the film that their minds are especially susceptible to suggestion and often soak up these messages like a sponge. It happens to everyone. It's happened to me, and if you think it's never happened to you, it means it happens to you the most. One film I recently watched because one of you guys suggested I take a look at it was the 2006 sci-fi movie Children of Men, directed by Mexican film director Alfonso Cuarón, based on the book by Phyllis Dorothy James. Now, like usual, we will be focusing on the film because, with very few exceptions, when books are adapted for film, they're just serving as a starting point and a brief outline for the screenwriters and take on a life of their own and are totally separate from the book. So we're just going to be looking at the film. So before we even get started, this film does not beat around the bush. It's very explicit with its pro-immigration message and its demonizing of the native population, in this case, the native British. So I thought I would take a look at where we were in the so-called refugee crisis when this film came out, which was in 2006. Wow, would you look at that? Almost as if they were pushing this film out as a means to condition people for what they knew lie ahead. Anyway, that's just a conspiracy. I'm sure I'm just being crazy. So anyway, let's have a look. Now, before there's any images at all on the screen, when just some of the credits are rolling or it's just the screen's black, we hear a voice, or we hear several voices of newscasters talking about authoritarian measures in Britain. Borders are being closed. Illegal immigrants are being deported. It's truly a bizarre world. And as much as that might sound like a dream come true to some of you, we can tell by the urgent tone of the reporters and how these sound bites are stitched together with reports of war and societal breakdown all across the world that this is really it's a scary leftist dystopia. You know, nationalist totalitarian governments seem to have taken control in response to some unknown crisis, and the future is bleak for anyone who embraces diversity and open borders. And then boom, the first images on the screen are of this dystopia. We have Londoners mourning the loss of the youngest person on Earth, Diego Ricardo. This person is the youngest person on Earth, but is only about 17 years old. So right away, the audience learns that something has gone horribly wrong with the fertility rate. In fact, it's so bad, it's non-existent. So only in a few seconds into the movie, actually, I think less than a minute into the movie, we're getting this exaggerated, panic-inducing version of one of the key justifications for allowing millions of refugees into Europe. You know, that the birth rates, they aren't high enough. We need to let all these people in. To add further to the urgency, the fictitious youngest person on Earth is shown to have been born in 2009. So for the audience, in 2006, this nightmare scenario is only 3 short years away. I mean, don't you understand? The birth rates of the native Europeans are dropping, and the only way to fix it is to import millions of foreigners year after year after year after year. There will be no discussion about why birth rates are dropping or whether or not that's even a problem that negatively impacts anyone but the rich ruling class who, you know, thanks to the capitalist usury model where they're constantly leveraging things, they require this constant growth. Or let's say maybe it is a problem. So what are some other solutions? Solutions that actually address the problem itself, the low birth rates themselves, and not a solution that creates a multitude of other problems so that a line on a graph on some bureaucrat's computer moves in the direction that they want. But of course, we all know by now there are far darker motives for importing the third world. It's not about economics. It's not about lines on graphs. We all know how broken up the ruling class is, that the white middle class is being dissolved and atomized along with their communities, and that, oh no, competing power structures are going along with them. But that, of course, is for another video. In 2006, the official line was people weren't breeding enough, and all the old people, they're going to die. Your grandma's going to die. Your parents are going to die. Nobody's going to be there to fund their pensions. You might die when you get old. We have to import these third worlders because they will become doctors and engineers and they'll fund the retirement of your grandparents and your parents. And so you better support it or they'll all die because of your bigotry. So all this is set up within the first minute of the film. And, it's no accident that the director is a Mexican immigrant himself. And, it's only going to get worse. So let's proceed. We're in London in 2027. It looks very multicultural and dystopian. So, the filmmakers got that part right. And there's also a terror attack that happens immediately after meeting our protagonist, Theo Farron, played by Clive Owen, when the shop he was just in watching about the youngest person dying explodes. So I guess the filmmakers kind of got that bit right too. So after surviving the terrorist attack, Theo goes into work and he has some kind of drab, boring office job. I don't know that it even really explains what it is. It's not really important. Everyone in the office is crying about the loss of the youngest person and watching all these videos of little baby Diego. And Theo uses this as an opportunity to get out of work and boards a train to get out of the city. Once on the train, we see propaganda playing on the screens in the train that depicts a world in chaos. Riots and war seems to be, covering the globe. But London is safe. Be glad that you're here in London. This idea that London is a safe haven, though, it's quickly shattered by the appearance of people outside the train hurling rocks and shouting at the occupants. When Theo gets off the train, we see the train station has a heavy police presence. Machine gun wielding guards stand at attention, and there's cages full of refugees awaiting deportation. Theo is welcomed by who we assume is his father, a long-haired hippie named Jasper, played by Michael Caine. And this character, like every character in this film, is representative of one of the groups that this film is attempting to influence. So let's see who we have so far. We have the straight white male, the protagonist of the film, the film's main target for influence, because the people behind the film know that this demographic, the white males, are going to be the hardest to convince that allowing hordes of third worlders into their lands, into their homes, and convince them that this is an acceptable thing to do, they're going to be the toughest sale. So it's no accident at all that the protagonist, the main character, is a straight white male who slowly comes to accept these ideas. And we also have his father, who's the older straight white male, the relic of the 60s, the boomer generation, who actually already embraces these changes without any convincing at all, in an attempt to remain cool and relevant. They've already feasted upon the spoils of post-World War II, and now as their lives are coming to an end, they have no problem handing over their nations to foreigners, no matter how badly it screws things up for their children and grandchildren. Their narcissism makes it impossible to even consider these things. The pretty young people on TV tell them that it's racist not to give away their country and their heritage. So, by God, they're going to be the first ones to hand it over. They have nothing to lose, and they have everything to gain. Just like with everything else their generation did, they will let their children worry about the consequences when they're gone. The two drive to Jasper's house, which is hidden in the forest because, like the stereotypical boomer hippie that he is secretly growing weed in the woods. This dried up old hippie is the wise sage of the film. And of course, this plays right into the ego of any boomer that might be in the audience. This is the character that they will be connecting with. The man who might be in the autumn of his years, but he was a rebel back in the day and still sticking it to the system by growing weed and supporting mass immigration. Later on, Theo is back in the city. He's walking to work and we see more refugees and illegal immigrants in cages. And then suddenly, he is kidnapped. The kidnappers take him to a secure location of some sort, and we find out he's been kidnapped by his ex-lover, Julian, who is played by Julianne Moore. Now, Julian represents another demographic, but as her character indicates, much like the boomer demographic, she hardly needs any convincing to support mass immigration at all. In fact, she's a general in this terrorist organization that supports mass immigration and is fighting the evil nationalist government. Julian represents the white women we see all over the West who, like the boomers, also side with the pretty people on TV telling them what to do, but unlike the boomers, who have grown old and can only offer support to the cause in the form of money and other resources, Julian is still young enough to be on the ground fighting for the oppressed. As we'll also see in a moment, this character that influences the protagonist, because this is the demographic that influences white men. What better way to get a man to do something irrational than with a woman? This is Influence 101. Intelligence agencies have been using honeypots for decades or more, or you can even take it all the way back to Adam and Eve. The devil knew it would be easier to convince Eve to take the fruit and then get her to influence Adam than if he had just gone straight to Adam. The woe of man has always played this role throughout history, and she plays it again in this film and on streets everywhere across the West. So Julian, using her powers of persuasion, convinces Theo to help her get transfer papers for a refugee they are moving to somewhere for some mysterious reason. Theo's cousin has access to these papers because he's high up in the nationalist government, so all he has to do is go to his cousin and convince him to give him the papers. And so when he does, we're also treated to a view of how the Nationalist Party lives. The decadence of the nationalists juxtaposed with the dystopian conditions of the masses further drives home that these evil fascists aren't doing what they're doing to protect the people, but to enrich themselves. Which is a pretty dark irony for anyone who actually understands the economic forces behind mass immigration. But, much like the Antifa protesters that fancy themselves fighting the system despite holding every view of every major corporate entity and the views of the billionaires that own them. The audience, same thing. The audience, most of the audience, they're already primed to think in this backwards, inverted way and easily embrace this notion that they're somehow, supporting the underdog. So Theo acquires the papers and meets with the terrorists, but unfortunately, he's going to have to actually accompany the refugee because of some technicality with the kinds of papers he was able to get. So we now meet two more characters that represent relevant demographic groups. We have Miriam, who represents the feminist cat lady demographic. She's fat and unattractive, and she's so abandoned her white heritage that she's even sporting a head full of dreadlocks. Now, this demographic is similar to the boomers in that their motivation for supporting these causes is that it feeds into their ego and it obscures many of the failures in their lives. You see, her life isn't meaningless. Living in an empty apartment, smelling like cat piss, she's a freedom fighter, fighting against the very people she's hated her entire life. Straight white men. And now we have Key. Key is the refugee that the terrorists are smuggling out of the country for reasons we'll discover later. Key, of course, is perfect. She's young and smart and funny and honest. She just wants to do the right thing. She's not a threat. You'd have to be a racist to not want to help someone like Key. She is the perfect immigrant, the kind that the government would be putting in pamphlets telling you about how they're going to be doctors and engineers. Now, on the way to their destination, the group is ambushed by marauding bandits and end up shooting some of the cops. Julian, having served her purpose by convincing the white man to go along with the plan, is killed in the chaos, no longer needed, and just discarded. The group flees to a safe house in the countryside, and now we have discovered why this straight white male has had to sacrifice so much, and will continue to do so. Key is pregnant. In this sci-fi childless world, Key is the key to the future. It's a miracle of biblical proportions. And the director's not exactly being subtle about this either. I mean, look at the setting. All that's missing is a manger and a star glowing over Key's head. Key and her baby are the future of the world, and this white man must sacrifice everything. So far, his livelihood and the love of his life, and we're just getting started, to ensure the future, not for himself or for his child, which, by the way, this might be a coincidence, but they mentioned that his child died in the big flu pandemic. Yeah, that's right. Theo's only kid that he had with Julian died in a worldwide flu pandemic. But anyway, well, that's something else. So now he can risk it all, everything else that he has left, to ensure the future for refugees and illegal immigrants like Key and their children. It's so disgustingly obvious what this film is doing at this point. It's hard to get through the rest, but I managed to soldier on. We learn next that there's a conflict because some of the terrorists want Key to have the baby at the safe house and then use the baby as a propaganda tool in their war against the nationalists. But others want to take Key to some scientist known only as the Human Project, who can be reached at sea. Later that night, in fact, we find out that Julian, who wanted to take the baby to the Human Project, wasn't killed by random bandits like everyone thought, but that it was actually an ambush. It was a plan by the terrorists to get her out of the way. Which again, once the white woman has served her purpose, she was no longer needed and no longer wanted and just tossed away like a piece of garbage. Theo manages to overhear all of this and decides that because the future is still black, he has to get Key to the Human Project. And he convinces Key and the cat lady to flee with him to his father's house, the home of the wise old boomer Jasper. Now, at this point, there's kind of a lull in the film. Everyone seems like they're safe. The filmmakers really want you to get to know and to like Key. And there's images like this that really kind of drill it into your head that the aging white population is the past and she's the future. Jasper, the pro-immigration boomer, through his connections, manages to arrange for the group to be smuggled into a refugee camp that's on the shore so they can meet up with this Human Project. His connection is an immigration cop that he sells weed to, which of course is another way to impress upon the audience the hypocrisy of the authoritarian nationalists they themselves are breaking the same laws that they're deporting and arresting other people for. Unfortunately, the terrorists who are hunting Theo, the cat lady, and Key show up after Theo has gone. And the boomer hippie, like many others in this film, makes the ultimate sacrifice to ensure the future of the refugee child. Theo and company then meet up with the fascist immigration cop, and he's exactly what you'd expect. He's wild-eyed and dumb and violent. He holds up his side of the bargain. He gets them on a bus to the refugee camp they want to go to so they can go to the shore and meet the Human Project. When they get to the camp, however, the cat lady now must lay down her life. She must sacrifice everything so the guards don't notice that Key is pregnant. One by one, every white person helping out this refugee is dying, is giving everything, and then dying for the future of her child. Once on the inside of the Mad Max-style refugee camp, Theo delivers Key's baby. It's a healthy girl, because the future isn't just black, it's female. Now we're going to kind of fast forward through the next bits because it's mostly just action sequences where Theo has to be heroic and has run-ins with, first the fascist cop who sees Theo on TV and now wants the reward, the terrorists from earlier in the film who want the baby, the British Army who's trying to stop the insurrection that's going on in the refugee camp. But really, all that matters now is that Theo, now that he's sacrificed his livelihood, he sacrificed his woman, he sacrificed his parents, he's done everything to ensure the safety and the future of the refugee child. All that he has left is to give up his life like everyone else. Fade gracefully away like his parents and like his love and like the cat lady. Give everything to these people until he has nothing left to give and then get out of the way. Because the future is black. And now he's just a thing of the past. He's obsolete, childless. He's the end of his people. For BlackPilled, I'm Devin Stack. If you like my videos, make sure you like and subscribe and make sure you share. If you want to support my work, you can do so at patreon.com/BlackPilled or subscribestar.com/BlackPilled or one of the crypto addresses below, or get a copy of my book. The link is in the description.